Today's guest on the podcast is Chris Tuff. He's the author of the book, The Millennial Whisperer. And you guys do not want to miss out on this episode. First of all, this guy has got the most amazing energy. I mean, we talked offline. We could have talked for 4 days. I mean, maybe I could have talked to him for 4 days. I just feel like I want to squeeze so much more information out of this guy. He's just awesome. Awesome. So much amazing perspective on everything from business to personal to professional. So enjoy this episode, you guys, and don't miss out on the opportunity to listen to this interview with Chris Tuff.
Welcome to the Same 24 Hours podcast with Meredith Atwood. We all have the same 24 hours each day, and it's what we do with those hours that makes all the difference between our health, happiness, and success.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Same 24 Hours podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Atwood. I'm so excited about today's guest. Chris Tuff is here. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
Oh my gosh. I am, like I said before we got started, I'm always stoked about my guests, but I have been, when our mutual friends, Brent and Kyle Peace, told me about you and your book, I thought, this is an awesome topic. This is going to be a great interview. And I can tell just from chatting before that we're gonna have a good time. So yay.
Yeah, I'm fired up. Thanks for having me on.
All right, so you guys, Chris is the author of the new-ish book, The Millennial Whisperer.
You know, you and I think have been in
how old are you?
probably. So I'm actually right on the cusp of being a millennial.
Okay.
I was born in 1980, 39. So for those that don't know, millennials are 38 years old to 23 years old, born between 81 and 96. So I'm actually, but I'll tell most people that deep down, I'm more of a millennial than most millennials. And, you know, one of the biggest things and why I really wrote the book is we've adapted so much within our lives and in the world that we live in. I mean, just look at the adoption of technology and how that's molded our lives. But we haven't changed the way that we run our businesses. And so one of my favorite quotes is millennials aren't the problem. They just expose all the problems. And I think that is probably one of the best. I want this book to act as a catalyst to change our organizations. And one of the biggest things is that, you know, this is a give and take kind of relationship for not only millennials, but Gen Z and how they relate up to boomers and Xers. But also the other way around. You know, what can boomers and Xers learn from millennials? And that's essentially what the book's about. Yeah.
Xers, Xers, boomers. So boomers are like they're like our parents because I'm your age.
Exactly.
Okay. And then, so I was born in 79. So am I a Zer or an Xer?
You're an Xer.
Okay. What's C?
So you've got boomers and then you've got Xers,
okay.
You know, Gen X.
Right.
And then you've got millennials and then you have Gen Z. Gen Z just now starting to hit the marketplace. Yes,
these
exactly.
are 18-year-olds.
18 to your children.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so there's the. So I had a moment of panic because I was the editor of my yearbook and I wrote an article on us being Generation X, and I thought, oh my gosh, did I get that wrong?
You got it right. Okay. You got it right.
Oh, I take so much pride in my yearbooks editor.
Totally.
You know.
Totally.
Okay, so continue.
So yeah, I mean, and what really inspired, you know, similar to I think some of the life changes that you've been going through and what inspired your book, I kind of hit rock bottom and I started the book 3 years ago. And it was during that time that I made some big changes in my life. You know, one of the biggest changes was my own metric of success. I, like you, am also a people pleaser. But also my metric of success was beating my brothers in the game of life. And
oh, yes.
I changed my metric in this rock bottom moment. And I changed it from beating them in the game of life to, you know, success being judged on a daily basis and being judged through the lens of impact made. So when my head hits the pillow at the end of the day, what is it that makes that day successful? And I either passed or I failed. And I can wholeheartedly say that every single day for the last 3 years since changing that metric, I've had a successful day.
What changed that metric? I mean, you don't have to go into rock bottom, but what made you come up with that as the new metric? Because I talk about that in my book a little bit, like that you have to come up with your own definition of what success looks like. Success can be objective, sort of, but really, if we're going to have any sort of real change in our life, we have to have our subjective own view of success.
Sure.
How did you come to that?
Well, so, I mean, for me, I've always known my own purpose, which is to inspire and connect. And I knew that my metric had to hone in on that as my strength and passion zone, to inspire people and connect with people. And so the success piece just came directly out of it. And, I think monetary and all that stuff, I at least had to throw that out the window because it's a zero-sum game, status and all that stuff. So to me, it actually came pretty easily, and implementing it was pretty easy, but getting there was the tough part. But it was with that I turned from being, I'm a partner at an ad agency. We're 370 people, 90% millennials, and I was the ringer. I was the Don Draper, if anyone's seen Mad Men, and that was my role. And I was flying all over the world, hobnobbing with the Sheryl Sandbergs and the Zuckerbergs and, drumming up new business and actually, succeeding in that domain. But what I found was with this metric, as the metric of success changed, I moved from being the point of the arrow to being a true servant leader and almost coach. And it was... I went to bed. I would come home so fired up and go to my wife, and I have two daughters, 7 and 9, and I would just be so excited about the impact that I was starting to make in these people's lives as we took down this curtain of, I think in our corporations we feel like, oh, you can't be friends with your people and you got to leave your personal stuff at home. I took down that curtain. And I became really good friends with everyone on my team. And we had therapy Thursdays where I was like, all right, everyone, I'm going to therapy. Who wants to come? You feel free to do it, And then if anyone has questions, I brought in a mindfulness coach. I started to do some pretty, what many people would say, crazy things. And it was 7 months into this that I was like, holy cow, we're now probably one of the most successful successful in terms of growth parts of our organization. Our culture within my department is contagious, and everyone kind of is clamoring to be a part of it. And I was at an executive men's retreat in North Georgia, where the average age was probably 45. Really well-known kind of leaders in Atlanta. I didn't know them at the time, really. This was just kind of something I went to better me as a person and father and all that. And I was introducing myself around the fire that first night, and I said, I don't really know what I do at my agency, but I've kind of become the Millennial Whisperer. And I went and shared my story about hitting rock bottom and changing my metric of success and all that stuff. But I sat down by the fire, and the guy leading the retreat, who I didn't know at the time, Tommy Breedlove, he kicks me and he looks at me. He goes, "You better write that book." And I was like, "What book?"
Yes.
He goes, "The Millennial Whisperer." And I was like, "Oh." And then so some of the other guys, I don't know if you have the Burt Show in
yes, I saw your video.
So Burt was on that retreat and has become a friend, but he was like, "Dude, I'm having the hardest time with some of these millennials. Talk to me about some of the things you do." And so I started talking about some of the tactics, and I get a call from Bert and a couple others about 2 weeks after returning from this awesome retreat, and they're like, "Chris, your stuff works. We're seeing happier people. We're seeing, very tangible things associated to a few small changes." And it was then that I actually went back in my text messages to Tommy, who's now one of my closest friends in the world. And he wrote the foreword to my book. And I had texted him. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this thing. And fast forward, I think we've sold close to 50,000 copies in 6 months. And by all kind of traditional book metrics, this thing is completely taken up. But, and I, once again, I come down to where I get, it does come down to that metric of impact. And, it's some crazy things have started to happen. I mean, I spoke at an event where I did the math in the room, and just in one speech, we probably impacted over 10 million employees' lives, which, it's starting to have that compounding effect.
Right.
And
right.
I think another important part, and you'll probably have questions around this, but I put it all on the line for this thing. I mean, I took
Yep.
a few $100,000 short-term high interest loan, which I still haven't paid off, because when you I'm a little out of control with I'm all in, everything's black or white, which I
Right.
struggle with gray, which I'm working on. So I walk the talk in terms of, really checking every box. And what's exciting right now, what we're working on is the digital curriculum. So,
Oh, that's good. Good.
really scale this thing without me having to leave my family to do speeches all over the place. So
Right.
that's
Right.
my quick. We can riff off of all that.
Yeah. So it's funny you mentioned kind of laying it on the line. I have a friend who texted me 2 days ago, and she's like, "Have you read Daring Greatly recently?" And I said, "No." Brene Brown's book. And I said, "No." Yeah. And she goes, "Is that like a no thanks? Like, shut up, leave me alone?" Because I just kind of dismissed it.
Totally.
And I said, "No. Okay, fine. What do I need to read?" And she pointed me to the chapter, and it said something, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically, unless your entire self-worth is on the line, you are not being courageous or vulnerable. And I thought, well, that's why I feel completely icky right now, because my
Yeah.
entire self-worth is on the line, like with kind of the next few months and kind of how I've structured myself. I'm a former attorney. I gave up my career and all of this to like chase this dream of being a writer and a coach and a podcaster. And you know how well this stuff pays. Like, people don't realize just how lucrative being an author really is. And so it's hard,
Yeah.
but I feel like I'm laying it on the line, and that's when you're doing the right thing, even though, like you said, you took out a loan and you're propping yourself up with all this, and it's scary.
Um,
Um,
Totally. And listen, it's also like I could chart now, and I've helped a handful of friends also with their kind of publishing journey. You're at the worst stage
yeah.
because you don't know, but seriously, I mean, you don't know whether or not it's good. You don't know whether or not it's going to be a success. And, we could talk a lot about books,
Yeah.
and the publishing journey and, some of those things, but know that your words, regardless of how perfect the words are, the general things are in there. So that's great.
The
And
summary is fine.
a lot of people, here's the other thing, a lot of people are lazy and don't read. So where you're going to make your biggest impact is what you're going to take from the book and put in your speeches that
Yeah.
then will scale the message and your platform. And so, I applaud you for putting it out there. And I don't think there is anything as vulnerable as writing a book. I really do not think that. I mean, it is as close to, what I would say the essence of vulnerability is. And so with that, I think the wins come not out of the gates, but with time. And
Yeah.
Dan Miller has kind of taken me under his wing, who wrote 48 Days to the Work You Love in 2005. He was way ahead of his time.
I heard
Which
Dan speak at a conference a couple years ago. He's awesome.
he's the best. He invited Tommy and I actually to go stay with him and just riff with no real agenda. And we've gotten to know each other really well. But the best piece of advice he gave me, well, one was what his whole platform is that I say life needs to be a ruthless pursuit of passions, and the rest will fall in place. And he's built a whole career off of that. And some of his stories are just amazing about how he's helped manage people and coach people into this place of their zone of excellence within passions. But the other piece that he gave me that I'm going to give to you is don't judge the quote unquote success of your book with your first week or your first 6 months or even your first year in terms of sales. It's what happens after 3 years. And not only that, but only 2% of your overall income will end up coming from your book if you're building the things the right way. And that's coming from a guy that sold millions of books with millions of dollars coming. So we can offline that. I've got a lot of
It's just, you know, it's the whole thing. And we can tie this back to your book, but the whole idea of uncertainty and the idea that we think we have certainty and we, you know, can control things. But when you really let go and allow the uncertainty to just kind of float around you and to just, you know, chill with it, that's a hard lesson. That's a hard, and that's, you know, that's where you're at in publishing. But let's go back to when you started at your PR firm, at your ad agent, is PR firm, I don't want to say it right. Ad agency.
Yeah.
When you started making these big changes in your little part of it, in the domain that you managed, what did the other partners say to you? What was the overall reaction company-wide?
Here goes Chris reinventing himself again. Let's see if it sticks, I think was what it was. You know, I tend to reinvent myself. I get bored easily. And, you know, I go back to when I help people work on their purpose statements, which if you don't have a personal purpose statement, then you better get writing and working. And it's one of the things I do with everyone on our teams. But one of the things I say to do is go back to your, you know, all of your report cards that you've gotten through school and take out some of those comments, because I bet what happened in 3rd, 2nd, 5th grade, what came through there is still true today, because that's where you're actually going into the core of your heart. And I go back to my whole thing, and I had some pretty bad report cards in like 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, and, you know, easily distracted, all this stuff. But one thing that came through and has stuck with me ever since is Chris's enthusiasm is contagious. And, you know, that then manifests itself as from my brother saying, Chris, I think you have a passion disorder. And I was like, is that a bad thing? And he's like, no, it's great. And passions evolve, right? And, you know, this other piece that I'm starting to talk a lot about, which I get really excited about, is this idea of currencies. And so for a company to see me, right, my whole currency at 22 Squared, where I'm a partner, was built upon being the digital media and social media expert. You know, I was one of the first people to work with Mark Zuckerberg in 2006 on his first products. I had one of the first viral videos to get over 1 million views with me filming my engagement running down the street of Atlanta, putting it on ChristopherTuff.com. It got us on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. We were on Good Morning America. Crazy stuff happens when you're in that zone of excellence / passion point, right? And, you know, the idea is that you're building a currency to match a need out there, which for me, for so long, was this kind of digital, social, emerging media stuff. But we change as humans. You know, we go through times where crisis catalyzes change in a lot of places, right? We develop, we evolve, and with that, our currencies follow. And I moved from the digital and social guy to how do you bring more love and connection into the world? But that's everything that I'm doing. I don't care whether it be with my daughters, my wife, everyone around me, the people I lead, my organization, you know, when I speak in front of thousands of people, that is my whole platform. Mm-hmm. And nothing is going to stop me from that. And when your intentions are so pure, I think that the best ends up actually coming. But that's all to say, and this is kind of what I'm figuring out now, to be honest, is that to go directly from an old currency, which, you know, the digital and social thing, to this new currency, there's actually a lot of overlap. And if we're doing a good job of reinventing ourselves constantly and pursuing some of those things of evolving passions and drive and purpose, then we've got to make sure that we're not going all the way to the left to all the way to the right. Right. And I say that in a long-winded response to your question of what did everyone think about you at making these changes. I think they embraced it. And part of the great, you know, what makes us different is we're kind of like family. And so they gave me the freedom to take a month off, figure my stuff out, and come back and reinvent myself. And they continue to work with me as we kind of find this blurred line between what's book and what's agency. And you know, you can hear it from me now. I'm still trying to figure it out, but all I can say is it's working. You know, we're talking to some of the biggest and best, most impactful and less impactful, biggest and best companies in the world. And, once again, I go back to this thing of if your passion is driving you, and your intentions are pure, nothing can stop you. And Meredith, you're going to get knocked down 9 million times between now and publish date and 6 months into having launched your book. And resilience and what helps you bounce back is a ruthlessness to pursuing, I think, that passion and drive. And you've already taken a lot of those big risks, it sounds like. And so
and I think my kind of route is, while I'm working on the book and doing the promotion around that, I coach women one-on-one. And so I get to do exactly what you like. My passion is I don't want any woman to hurt unnecessarily, or man for that matter, but to hurt unnecessarily if I can share my story and tell them what I did to get out of my own way. And so I'm able to work one-on-one with women, and that drives me every day because, the results are, and I don't want to say results, but the impact is tangible. Like, because you're talking to someone and you're watching them on FaceTime and you're seeing their joy or their sadness. And that's enough to drive me, whatever this book does, like whatever, whatever.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And the term burn the boats.
Yes, Tony
and
Robbins.
And where that actually comes from is actually Dan Miller gave me he actually, when I went to
was
go
it
stay
Dan
with
Miller
him.
and Lifted by Tony?
So if you go back to kind of like the core books that a lot of these leaders end up reading, one of the books was published way back. God, what's it called? I'm reading it right now.
I know is it Napoleon Hill?
Yes. What's it called?
What a man think no.
Wait.
Though a man thinketh, or maybe that's not the
Think and Grow Rich.
Think and Grow Rich.
I finally started reading that. I didn't realize where Burn the Boats comes from, the story, but it was an army that was going to invade, and they wanted to seal their fate as the successful conquerors or warriors in this sense by burning the boats so no one could retreat. So they went in on the boats. I didn't realize that that's what it was all about. And listen,
you're like,
some
why
of
is
us
everyone burning some perfectly good boats.
totally. And it's like, do you really have to burn the boats in this? Like, and like I am the first person, I think, to go get the gasoline and the lighter, being like, all right, let's do this thing.
I am too, Chris. Like, I just think, like, once you've decided, like, what else is there?
100%. But you know what I'm learning is I'm learning restraint, and that, I don't do anything halfway, right? I'm either gonna
it's a passion disorder.
Totally. I'm not going to run 3 miles. I'm going to do a marathon. I'm not going to get a tattoo. I'm going to get a full sleeve. Right. I'm not going to write a book. I'm going to get a bestseller. I'm not going to and it's like I take a deep breath because I think we put ourselves under such ridiculous expectations and pressures that aren't necessarily, both healthy or needed. And so be careful as you go into this thing. What I tell everyone who's writing a book is at the top of your mirror, write why you're writing this book and go back to it every single day because things spiral out of control. I've now put in almost probably $500,000 into my book, and I've made a lot of good decisions and a handful of bad ones with that investment. But I sometimes wish I had something to go back to when thinking about where to invest,
right?
Because things get out of control as you get more competitive and all these other things. So
sure, absolutely. The why is always important, and the why is important in pretty much every area of your life, I think, if you're gonna survive.
Totally. And bounce back. Yeah.
Right. So let's actually go back and talk about millennials.
Sure.
What is the deal with millennials? Because your whole book is about that. But why do they get a bad rap? And what are you whispering?
So one of the things that, totally. And listen, my whole thing, I'm not like the perfect leader. I'm not the essence of my book is more about, it's all based on research, lots of it. I worked with Vanderbilt on all the research, and it's all cited throughout. But one of the things is this isn't. I'm not guessing as to how to lead these next generations. It's based in real data. Mm-hmm. I bring it to life with stories and tangibles and takeaways, which is, I think, the art of and what makes, I think, this book a little, pretty special, because you can get immediate impact without investing a bunch of money. So I think that's one thing. But for me, it is it's what are those. I hate when you read a book or you hear a speech and you don't have okay, what can I do now? And I want everyone to walk away constantly with ideas of, okay, how can we actually start impacting our culture now? But one of the things I say is, look, millennials have just gotten a bad rap. And we got to stop using millennials as a synonym for young and inexperienced. Because the unfortunate thing is millennials are young and inexperienced. And guess what? The same thing happened when Gen Xers were entering the marketplace. The same thing happened when the boomers were entering the marketplace. And if you go back to the core, we're actually a lot more in common than you think. Mm-hmm. And if you look at some of the key things that millennials and Gen Z are looking for, I love using flexible work environment being kind of one of the, work flexibility is one of the big ones. They work from where they want to work, and as long as they can get the job done. And one of the biggest discrepancies that I hear from leaders is that I will ask them, do you want flexible work? Because it's the number one thing that you can put into place right now and have a huge impact on retention as well as recruitment. And what I hear time and time again is, no. And then it's like, okay, why? Well, I had to do it this way. Why don't they? Mm-hmm. And you take that same thing
that
and
school of hard knocks.
Totally. And you switch it, and you say, so I hear you have a millennial child. Is that correct? And it's like, yeah, I've got a 27-year-old or 28-year-old. And then you turn it and say, well, would you say that you support them in their pursuit of their next job with flexible work? They say, absolutely. That's my kid. And it's kind of like, it's hilarious because that's kind of what we're up against. And I hear time and time again that after reading the Millennial Whisperer, my book, people will say, I now understand my kids a lot better.
Right.
But, one of the big things that I do set out in the book is, first of all, we need to take this massive generation and split them into two different generations, older millennials and younger millennials. And what makes them different is what they grew up around. Older millennials had beepers in college. They didn't even have a cell phone. Okay.
That's right.
Younger millennials were given a iPhone with a Snapchat account at age 13. So one, what makes them two very different generations is that. And number two is when the recession of 2008 either hit their parents for younger millennials or them in the marketplace for older millennials. And it's really with those two influences that make them very different generations in terms of what they're looking for and how to create an environment where they thrive. So that's one thing. So the other piece is then let's not focus on what they're looking for from the workplace, because actually if you look at the number one thing that millennials and Gen Z is looking for, it's no different than any other generation. It's pay and benefits. Where it's a little bit different is work culture is number two. Work culture never came up in a Gen X survey because they saw their parents.
Because there was no culture.
Exactly. It was, what the culture.
Grind.
Yeah, it was a grind. And then it was a badge of honor when you sent that email at 3 a.m. because you were grinding it out the hardest. And it's because of the product of what they were born into, which their parents got the watch for staying at the place for 17 years, etc. Right? So,
yes, the watch.
So, it's I think so. But where I like to emphasize is what are they looking from leaders? What are the things that we can do as leaders that can change the environment? And so number one, what they're looking for is inspirational leadership. And, you take something like inspirational leadership and you ask any leader, let's just say Bob has 30 millennial and Gen Zers on his team. And it's like, Bob, so we hear that according to the 2018 Deloitte Millennial Survey, the number one thing your workers are looking for is inspirational leadership. Now, Bob, would you consider yourself an inspirational leader? Bob will say, hell yeah. They just light up. They laugh at everything I say. You should see my, status meetings, blah, blah. It's like, thanks, Bob. And then you go to two people on Bob's team. And they're like, listen, we got to figure out if Bob's an inspirational leader. Would you consider Bob an inspirational leader? Their first question is always going to be, is Bob going to find out if I tell him?
Right.
And so when it's like, no, Bob's not going to find out, it's like, hell no, he's not. And so that, I think, is such an important piece, coupled with, I think a lot of introverts think that only extroverts can be inspirational. And there's a lot of ways to be inspirational. And I talk a lot about that in the book and tactics that we can use to do that. A big part of inspirational leadership is just rewarding and recognizing your people. So what are the things that we can put into place to reward and recognize our people constantly, as well as other pieces. But, so inspirational leadership, I actually created a 360 millennial leadership assessment that ranks based on 8 key tenets of coming out of the research that we did, inspirational leadership being one of them, but also opening it up from a 360 point of view where people on the team can actually comment on their leaders with such things. So inspirational leadership, I could talk obviously a lot about, but the other pieces that are so important are, autonomy and transparency and purpose. And any one of those we could wrap on, but I'll let you kind of choose your answer from that.
Well,
Autonomy.
I kind of want to see if we can talk about autonomy and purpose, because I want to go back to the personal purpose statement and kind of what that is. And I think autonomy and purpose they're obviously closely related.
Totally. Yeah. So which one you want me to hit?
Yeah, let's talk about the personal purpose statement. What is that, and what does it entail, and how do you write one?
Sure. So the first thing that I'll tell anyone, especially as you look to Gen Z, if you don't, as a corporation, have your own purpose that is front and center, that is bigger than your bottom line, or stock ticker symbol or whatever it is, then you better get working on it, because you're not going to be able to attract younger millennials and Gen Z without that. And so, I go back to our purpose statement as a corporation is together we give rise to change. And so when you put your purpose statement in place, also make sure you have the tactics to support it, because there's nothing worse than hypocrisy, because you'll get called out in 2 seconds if you don't walk that talk. And so we actually give, so an example of that, living that purpose, is we give all of our employees 5 days off to donate their time to any nonprofit of their choice. So we walk the talk in that sense. And then I take it to the next level, where I will work with everyone on my team to come up with their personal purpose statements, which we will do over a 6-week period of time. And actually in my book, I have a list of questions that I have people fill out. And usually that gets us pretty close to where a purpose statement will live. I'll also reference Simon Sinek's This Is Your Why and the workbook if we can't get there off of this one-sheeter. But the key thing with the purpose piece is that once you have your purpose in place and we announce it to everyone and that you're proud of it and you're willing to kind of wear it on your sleeve, then we got to make sure that we're filling that purpose with something. So what we'll do is we'll take someone's job description and day-to-day and put that down on a piece of paper. And then we'll look at their purpose statement, and then we'll figure out what their side hustle is. And I tell to everyone that you got to embrace your employee's side hustle, because, we just say 20% of your time can be in line with your side hustle, and your side hustle can be almost anything as long as it's not competitive with our agency. And we've had some people donate their time to local nonprofits. We've had a woman whose purpose was to make women feel more confident in their own skin. We had one woman create a clothing brand. And, one of the big things is that you hear time and time again that this next generation will hop around, job hop, because they think that there is this life on the other side where the grass is always greener. And one of my big things is, allow them to scratch that itch of their purpose with giving them the time and the opportunities and resources to pursue side hustles. But also, it's through that they learn how difficult it is to make these things a success. I mean, Meredith, you're living it right now,
Yeah.
And it's a roller coaster. And so, so that purpose stuff, like, let's scratch that itch. Let's make sure that we're putting things in place that they can do that. But it also leads me to kind of that give and take relationship of what this next generation needs from us. I call it my 70-30 rule, which is that, 30% of your job is going to suck. 30% is going to be in this zone of suckness. And I mean, for me, it's anything in Excel. 70% should fuel you up, fire you up, keep you going. But my 70-30 rule is, let's take your job description. Let's figure out what's in your 70 and what's in your 30. So when you're actually doing those things that are in your 30% zone of suckness, then you will actually get it done until you get to the other side. Mm-hmm. And, I talk a lot in the book about the influence of social media, especially on the younger the younger millennials, and even all of us, being that we have this idea that this perfect life exists outside of our own walls. And a lot of people jump ship to pursue that. And the reality is that there's no such thing. And we've got to constantly stop comparing our insides to other people's outsides. And you look at all of the statistics that are coming out that this thing is just compounding on itself. And, I actually, part of the vulnerability and transparency piece of being a leader is me admitting to all of my employees that I have been in your shoes. I hired a fishing guide 4 years ago in Sun Valley, Idaho. I call it my river runs through it story, where I hired this guide and I turned to him. I gave him $600 and I said, listen, I don't really feel like fishing. I don't care about fishing. I don't like fish, but I want 2 Instagram shots. I want a picture of the trout with the net behind it. I don't care if you catch it, I catch it, he catches it. I don't care. And then I want another shot of me Brad Pitting it in the river with the river flowing and the mountains in the background. And that's it. And the guy turns to me dumbfounded, being like, wait, so you're going to spend $600 on an Instagram post? I'm like, no, it's like $300 each. Let's go. And I admit that to all of my employees because that's a low moment, but it's a reality. And we've got to move away from what I call this Pinterestation of a generation. Your first day of school, Abigail's holding up that perfect little chalkboard and her favorite food. And I mean, it is absolutely exhausting.
It's exhausting.
Right? And so let's all take a deep breath. Let's remind ourselves what our purpose is, and also understand that we're damn lucky to be able to pursue some of those things, in our case, at the place where they also pay us. And
that's so awesome. Gosh, I love the idea of fostering the side hustle. I mean, I did the side hustle for 8 years while I was a practicing attorney, and I thought I did a good job keeping it separate. And then my boss at the last firm I was working at, she's like, I just want to tell you, I love reading your blogs. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't know you read them, and she sent out one of my race reports to firm wide. And I thought, oh, I'm going to die. But when I turned in my resignation, when I leapt out of the legal profession, I told her, I said, it's not about you or the job or anything. You've been wonderful to me. And she said, well, if you weren't going to quit, I was going to fire you because you didn't need to be doing this. This is not your purpose.
Wow.
And it's so funny because she contacted me a month ago and she said, that big, and I give her an accent because she's got this great accent. She said, that big convention we go to in Colorado every year with the firm? And I said, yeah. And she said, I want to put your name in the hat for the keynote. And I said, are you kidding? I would love to do that. That would be such an honor to come speak to my former, industry. And they bit. And so I'm actually giving the keynote at this big conference in our industry in Vail, Colorado in November.
Awesome.
And I thought, this is just the most amazing thing. And it's because like once she told me she saw my side hustle and she kind of affirmed it. I mean, it changed everything.
Sure.
And sure, I left the firm, but they're fine, you know.
Totally.
Believe it or not, people will be okay without you.
Well, and think about how many people do these side hustles and then they figure out what is it, 90% of all startups fail. Like they figure out how hard it really is. Or we call them boomerangs, where they end up leaving and then they call, it's usually around 8 months later that they're like, actually, hey, can we come back to work there? Because where we're at or what we're doing, or I ran out of money, it's not that great. So, I think, I think it's something that if you actually look at any of the most successful startups, they have very structured programs around side hustles. Yeah. Google calls it their 20% rule. Facebook, it's known as their fuel program, FUEL. And so I think you look at where some of their most innovative and successful projects have come from. They've come from these areas. Yeah. So people will be like, "Oh, well, what's the ROI of that?" And my immediate response is happiness and retention.
Right.
And then so every once in a while, you'll probably get a byproduct that has a true ROI associated to it. But anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about autonomy.
Sure. So I went in I looked within myself because once again, I am more of a millennial than most millennials. And autonomy for me is because it's just not being micromanaged. And I go back to, I was about 5 years ago. And my wife and I were on our way back from our holiday party. And my wife kind of looks at me astounded and impressed and said, "Chris, I can't believe you've stayed in one place for 5 years. Like, that's pretty impressive. Like, how do you think they've been able to keep you?" And my immediate response was, well, they've given me a long enough leash to be entrepreneurial, but enough structure that I feel like I'm constantly becoming a better leader. And I think it's with that give and take or, well-roundedness that I would say is best representative of what autonomy means to me. But I went looking for it. And in researching for the book, I went to the most reliable of resources called Google. And I Googled #1 boss for millennials. And sure enough, Forbes called this guy, Ben Kirshner, out of Philadelphia, as the #1 boss for millennials. So I found his cell phone and gave him a call and told him about what I was doing. And he was super fired up. And he has a organization of over 1,000 millennials, mostly millennials. And we started talking about autonomy. And I said, "Ben, what does autonomy mean to you?" And his immediate response was, "Have you ever heard of the term Under Armour uses, protect this house?" And I was like, kind of, remind me. And he goes, "Well, Under Armour had this campaign where it was protect this house. And it was all about the culture and, it's the importance of protecting the house with, when it comes time for game time." And so anytime that I speak in front of all my employees or my team or a group, I will remind them it's up to them to protect this house. And if you have a bad culture fit, it's up to them to protect this house. When it comes time for unlimited paid vacation, which they do, when someone needs to cover for the other person, it's up to them to protect this house. And what it does is it creates not only autonomy, but a checks and balances where they're pushing down that responsibility. Mm-hmm. And, it's amazing how humans work, where they feel if they can feel a part of the solution, they'll go along with it a lot better too. Right. And I talk about tactics about, how to attract talent and, even the interview process. It's just involve your people in the process, people, and I think it's a lot of those things of what I think best represents this idea of autonomy.
Awesome. Well, Chris, I have enjoyed this so much. I just adore you. It's so much fun. So much fun. I have one final question.
Oh, uh-oh.
It's not a bad one. Okay, so this podcast, it's called The Same 24 Hours, which means we all have the same 24 hours in our day. It's what we do with those 24 hours that leads to our greatest health, happiness, pursuit of happiness, and success. So what is something that you do on a daily basis, maybe outside of your kind of metric of success, but something that you do on a daily basis that you can kind of point to and say, that makes my day better?
I mean, it's 100% physical fitness. And it was funny. I was meeting with a very successful executive last night, and we were talking about a similar question to what you just asked me, and we both referenced Naval, who's a big podcaster. He does, a lot of stuff around wealth building and other things, and he's like, yeah, Naval was the one that inspired me to actually really focus on the physical side. So, and this guy is also the one that I go to the gym with where we meet Tramel, who's our trainer, who absolutely destroys us Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5:30 in the morning.
Right.
And, it's funny though, like ever since, I've been now lifting for the first time in my life. I'm a big runner. I'm a big cyclist, all those things, but I'd never really lifted. And it's made such an impact on my life. And working out, I think, with other people is like there's that camaraderie of going through the suck together that is refreshing. But so I mean, that's my long-winded way of saying like the physical side of our health and wellness, along with fueling with the right stuff. I mean, listen, I also eat half a pint of ice cream every night. So I'm not like the perfect specimen, but I think that we forget that the most important thing to our day-to-day is our physical and health, our physical and mental health. And we don't usually put as much emphasis on it as we should. And those that do truly are the most successful people in the world. And by success, I mean, the most well-rounded, the most impactful people, not monetary.
Well, thank you, Chris. This was great.
I love it.